Have you ever witnessed discrimination so blatant that when justice finally arrived, the entire room erupted in applause? Because that's exactly what happened when a cafe manager named Susan Caldwell refused to serve a black man in work clothes, calling security to remove him for loitering and making other customers uncomfortable, never realizing that the man she was humiliating was actually David Mitchell, the CEO of the corporation that owned the entire cafe chain, who'd gone undercover in construction gear to inspect his locations and see how his employees truly treated customers. And what happened next became the most satisfying workplace justice moment in modern corporate history. Let me take you to the Riverside Café in downtown Seattle on a rainy Thursday morning, where the smell of overpriced lattes mixed with the quiet hum of laptops and hushed business conversations. The kind of upscale coffee shop that brands itself as community-focused and inclusive, while charging $8 for a medium coffee and somehow still managing to make certain people feel unwelcome based purely on how they look. David Mitchell had built his cafe empire from nothing, starting as a teenager washing dishes in his uncle's diner in South Chicago, working his way through community college on night shifts, eventually earning his MBA while managing 3 restaurant locations simultaneously, and finally launching his own company 20 years ago with a single food truck and a dream of creating spaces where everyone truly felt welcome, regardless of race, class, or background. Now, at 52 years old, he owned 47 cafe locations across the Pacific Northwest, employed over 800 people, and had a personal net worth that most people couldn't comprehend. But he never forgot where he came from, never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, to be judged, to be treated as less than human because of the color of his skin or the neighborhood he grew up in. That's why twice a year, David did what he called his reality checks. He'd dress in worn jeans, a faded work jacket, scuffed boots, and a baseball cap. Then visit his locations unannounced to see how his staff treated customers who didn't look wealthy, who didn't fit the upscale demographic his marketing team targeted, who might be construction workers on their lunch break or delivery drivers grabbing a quick coffee between routes. His executive team knew about these visits but never knew when they'd happen, and David had made it clear. Any location that failed his test of basic human decency would face immediate consequences, because he'd rather lose profit than lose his integrity. On this particular morning, David had already visited 3 locations and been pleasantly surprised by the genuine warmth and professionalism he'd encountered. But his 4th stop at the Riverside Café was about to reveal something that would shake his company to its core. He walked in around 10:30 a.m., his Carhartt work jacket spotted with paint from an actual construction project he'd helped with the previous weekend at a community center. His boots muddy from the rain, his hands showing the calluses of someone who still knew how to work with them. And he carried a worn backpack that had seen better days, by all appearances. He was just another working-class black man taking a break from manual labor. Exactly the kind of customer who should feel welcome in any business that claims to serve the community. The cafe was moderately busy with the usual late-morning crowd, freelancers on laptops, a few business meetings in progress, some students studying in the corner, and David noticed immediately that the demographic was overwhelmingly white and affluent. Designer bags hanging from chair backs, AirPods in ears, the latest MacBooks on every table. He approached the counter where Susan Caldwell stood, a 38-year-old white woman who'd been managing this location for 3 years, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun that matched her tight smile, her eyes scanning David with barely concealed distaste from the moment he walked through the door. "Welcome to Riverside Café. How can I help you?" she said, but her tone carried none of the warmth she'd used with the previous customer, a white woman in business casual who'd just ordered a complicated drink with 7 modifications and received patient, cheerful service. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Axiom USA for more real stories of injustice and justice. David smiled genuinely, the kind of warm smile that had disarmed countless business adversaries and won over skeptical investors. "Good morning. I'd like a large black coffee and one of those blueberry muffins in the case. Please." It was a simple order, straightforward, polite, but Susan's expression shifted to something colder. "I'm going to need to see payment first." We've had issues with people ordering and then claiming they can't pay. The implication was clear and insulting. The assumption that a black man in work clothes couldn't afford a coffee, and David felt the familiar sting of discrimination but maintained his composure. Of course, no problem, he said, pulling out his worn leather wallet, deliberately choosing to pay with cash rather than reveal the Black American Express card that sat behind it. He placed a $20 bill on the counter, but Susan didn't move to take it, instead crossing her arms and saying something that made several nearby customers turn to look. Actually, sir, I'm not sure this is the right establishment for you. We have a dress code, and we maintain certain standards for our clientele, so perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the McDonald's down the street. The words landed like a physical blow, not because they hurt David personally, but because they revealed exactly the kind of discrimination he'd built his company to fight against. The kind of casual racism that hides behind words like standards and dress code, when what it really means is, we don't want people like you here. David glanced around the cafe, noting several customers in casual athletic wear, one man in actual gym shorts and a tank top, a woman in yoga pants and a sports bra with a jacket thrown over it. And he said calmly, I see several customers in casual clothing, and there's no dress code posted on your door or website. I'm just looking for coffee. Ma'am, not trying to cause any trouble. But Susan had made her decision, had chosen this hill to die on, and she raised her voice deliberately to attract attention. Sir, I've asked you politely to leave, and if you don't, I'll have to call security. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, and frankly, you're making other customers uncomfortable. David looked around at the uncomfortable customers and saw something interesting. Several people looked genuinely uncomfortable, but not because of him, because of Susan's treatment of him. A young white couple near the window were whispering to each other with concerned expressions. A middle-aged black woman in business attire had stopped typing on her laptop and was watching with recognition in her eyes. The recognition of someone who'd experienced this same discrimination. And an elderly white man who appeared to be a regular was shaking his head with visible disgust. Ma'am, David said, keeping his voice level and clear so everyone could hear, I've done nothing to make anyone uncomfortable. I walked in, politely placed an order, and offered payment. So I'm confused about what the actual issue is here. Could you explain it to me? Susan's face flushed red, angry at being challenged, angry at having to justify what she saw as her rightful authority. The issue is that we've had problems with people from the construction site down the street coming in here, using our bathroom, making a mess, lingering for hours without buying anything. And I'm not going to let this location turn into a homeless shelter or a break room for day laborers. We're a premium cafe serving a specific clientele, and if you can't understand that, then I can't help you. The classism and racism were now explicit, the mask completely off, and the cafe had gone silent except for the espresso machine and background music. Everyone watching to see how this would unfold. If you're feeling this story, hit that like button and share this video to support Axiom USA and help us reach more people who need to hear these truths. David reached into his backpack, and Susan immediately tensed. Her hand moving toward the phone, but he simply pulled out his phone and said, I'd like to speak with your district manager. Please, this is clearly a situation that needs to be escalated. Susan laughed. Actually laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. By all means, waste your time and theirs. I'll get my district manager on the line right now. And she'll back me up completely because we have policies about maintaining our brand standards, and you clearly don't meet them. She pulled out her own phone with theatrical confidence, dialed and put it on speaker, apparently eager to humiliate David further by having her superior confirm her authority. Hi, Susan, what's going on? Came the voice of District Manager Patricia Chen, who David knew well because he'd promoted her to that position 18 months ago after she'd impressed him with her commitment to inclusive customer service. Patricia, I have a situation here. There's a man who came in looking like he just left a construction site, and I've asked him to leave because he doesn't meet our standards and he's making customers uncomfortable, but he's refusing and now demanding to speak with management. So I need you to back me up on this. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. and David could practically hear Patricia's mind working, calculating, and then her voice came back careful and tight. "Susan, can you describe this person for me?" Susan rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed at having to justify herself further. "Black male? 50s, wearing dirty work clothes, muddy boots, baseball cap. Backpack? Looks like he should be on a job site, not in a premium cafe. And I'm not going to apologize for maintaining standards." Another pause, longer this time, and then Patricia's voice came back with an edge that Susan completely missed. "Susan, I'm going to need you to do exactly what I say. First, apologize to that customer immediately. Second, give him anything he wants completely free of charge. And third, go to the back office and wait for me because I'm 15 minutes away and we need to have a serious conversation." Susan's confident expression faltered. "What?" "Patricia, I don't understand. I'm following protocol about maintaining brand standards and—" But Patricia cut her off firmly. "Susan, that's not a customer. That's David Mitchell, the CEO of our entire company. And you just discriminated against the man who signs both our paychecks based on how he's dressed. So if you want any chance of keeping your job, you'll do exactly what I said right now." The phone might as well have exploded for the impact those words had. Susan's face went from flushed red to pale white in seconds, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, her hand trembling as she nearly dropped the phone, and the entire cafe seemed to collectively gasp as the revelation spread through the space. Want to hear more real stories of racism and justice every week? Subscribe to Axiom USA and never miss these powerful moments. David watched Susan's face cycle through shock, disbelief, terror, and desperate calculation. But he didn't smile, didn't gloat, just maintained the same calm dignity he'd shown throughout her assault. "Mr. Mitchell," Susan stammered, her voice cracking. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "I didn't recognize you. Please let me get you that coffee. Anything you want, completely on the house." "I made a terrible mistake," but David raised one hand to stop her, and his voice when he spoke carried the weight of every time he'd been discriminated against. Every employee who'd experienced this same treatment. Every customer who'd been made to feel unwelcome because of how they looked. "Susan, let me be absolutely clear about something. You should be apologizing not because you found out who I am, but because what you did was wrong regardless of who I am. That man in work clothes you tried to throw out could have been a construction worker on his lunch break, a plumber who just fixed someone's emergency, a painter who works hard for his family. And he would have deserved the exact same respect you show your customers in business suits or yoga pants." The cafe customers were now openly watching. Several had their phones out recording, and David saw the young couple nodding in agreement. The black woman in business attire had tears in her eyes, and the elderly regular was now standing as if ready to testify. "You didn't refuse me service because of a dress code. Because, as I pointed out, several customers here are in casual athletic wear, and you served them cheerfully. You refused me service because you made assumptions about who I was and whether I belonged here based on the color of my skin and the clothes I was wearing. And then you doubled down by explicitly stating that people from construction sites and day laborers weren't welcome in your premium cafe, as if people who work with their hands aren't worthy of your $8 coffee." Susan was crying now, mascara running down her face. But David wasn't finished because this wasn't just about her. It was about a pattern, a culture, a problem that existed beyond this one location. "You said you were maintaining brand standards. But let me tell you what my brand standards actually are. Every person who walks through our doors deserves respect regardless of race, class, occupation, or appearance. Our mission statement, which you apparently never read, explicitly says, we're committed to creating inclusive community spaces where everyone feels welcome, and you violated that mission in the most explicit way possible." Patricia arrived exactly 15 minutes later, a 42-year-old Asian-American woman in professional attire, moving with the urgency of someone who knew her own job, might be on the line for having hired and supervised Susan, and she approached David with genuine contrition. "Mr. Mitchell, I am profoundly sorry. There's no excuse for what happened here. and I take full responsibility for not recognizing the problems with this location sooner." David nodded at Patricia, who he knew to be genuinely committed to inclusion. "Patricia, we'll talk. But first I want to address everyone in this cafe, because what happened here matters beyond just this incident." He turned to face the full room, and his voice carried the authority of someone who'd built an empire but never forgotten his humanity. "My name is David Mitchell. I own this company, and I'm standing here in work clothes because I wanted to see how my employees treat people who don't look wealthy or professional. And what I witnessed today was discrimination, classism, and racism hiding behind corporate language about standards and brand image." Several customers started applauding, but David gestured for quiet. "I don't want applause. I want change. I want every person in this room to think about the times you've witnessed discrimination and said nothing. The times you've made assumptions about someone based on how they look. The times you've been complicit in creating spaces that make certain people feel unwelcome." He looked directly at the young white couple. "You two were uncomfortable. I saw it on your faces, but did you speak up? Did you say something when you saw injustice happening?" They looked down, ashamed. And the young man said quietly, "No, sir, we didn't. And we should have." David nodded. "Acknowledgement is the first step. Action is the next. Next time, speak up. Because silence enables discrimination." He turned to the black woman in business attire. "You recognized what was happening because you've experienced it yourself, haven't you?" She nodded, her voice emotional. Too many times to count. "Mr. Mitchell, in places that claim to be inclusive but whose actions tell a different story." David's expression softened. "I'm sorry you've experienced that, and I'm sorry it happened in one of my locations. But I promise you it's going to change." He addressed the elderly white regular. "Sir, I saw you shaking your head. What were you thinking?" The old man stood straighter. "I was thinking that I've been coming to this cafe for 2 years, and I've seen Susan treat people differently based on how they look. But I convinced myself it wasn't my place to say anything because I'm just a customer. But I was wrong. And I'm ashamed it took your presence to make me realize I should have spoken up months ago." David nodded with respect. "It's never too late to start, sir, and I appreciate your honesty." Then he turned back to Susan, who was still standing behind the counter looking like her world had ended. "Susan, you're fired, effective immediately. Not because you didn't recognize me, but because you violated every value this company stands for. And I can't have someone managing a location who treats customers with such contempt based on their appearance." Susan started to protest, to beg, to promise she'd change. But David was firm. "You had every opportunity to treat me with basic human dignity, and you chose not to. You escalated the situation. You explicitly stated your prejudice. And you did it with confidence because you believed your authority protected you. So now you get to experience what it feels like when that authority is removed. And maybe that will teach you something about treating people with respect, regardless of their position in life." Patricia stepped forward. "Mr. Mitchell, I should have caught this sooner. I should have been doing more frequent check-ins, and if you need to fire me too, I'll understand." David looked at her carefully. "Patricia, you're not fired, but you are on notice. I need you to do a full audit of all your locations. Talk to employees confidentially about management behavior, review any customer complaints that might have been dismissed, and implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for everyone from baristas to managers. And if you find any other situations like this, you address them immediately, understood?" Patricia nodded with visible relief and determination. "Yes, sir, absolutely. And I want you to know that I've already started reviewing Susan's location based on some informal complaints I'd heard, but hadn't prioritized. And that's on me, and it won't happen again." Over the next week, the story exploded across social media after several cafe customers posted their videos online, and the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people shared their own stories of being discriminated against in supposedly inclusive spaces. Workers from other service industries posted about customers who treated them with contempt. And a national conversation emerged about the gap between corporate diversity statements and actual practice. David did something unprecedented. He released a video statement acknowledging that if discrimination happened at one location, his company had systemic problems that needed addressing, and he announced several major changes including mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, a confidential hotline for reporting discrimination, a commitment to hire from diverse backgrounds at all levels, and a pledge to personally visit locations quarterly in civilian clothes and phone records showed they'd complained about Susan's discriminatory behavior to Patricia, who'd logged the complaints but not escalated them adequately. David gave all three their jobs back with back pay and promotions, and he made their stories part of his company's training materials. Susan tried to fight her termination, hired a lawyer who claimed wrongful dismissal, but the video evidence from multiple customers, combined with the documented previous complaints and her own explicit statements about not wanting day laborers in the cafe, made her case impossible, and even her lawyer eventually advised her to drop it because pursuing it would only make the videos go more viral. The Riverside Cafe location saw a dramatic transformation. David promoted a young black barista named Marcus, who'd worked there for 18 months and had consistently treated every customer with respect regardless of appearance. He became the new manager and immediately fostered a culture where dignity and inclusion weren't just words but daily practice. And interestingly, the cafe's business increased by 40% over the next quarter because people wanted to support a location that stood for something real. 6 months later, David returned to that same Riverside Cafe, again in work clothes, again unannounced, and this time when he walked in, Marcus greeted him with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Riverside. How can we help you today?" David ordered the same coffee and muffin, and Marcus served him with the same respect he showed every customer. And when David revealed himself, Marcus just smiled and said, "I knew it was you, Mr. Mitchell, but even if it wasn't, we treat everyone the same here now. That's what you taught us." The elderly regular was there again, and he approached David. "I wanted you to know, I've started speaking up when I see discrimination anywhere now, not just here, because you taught me that silence is complicity. And at my age, I don't have time to waste staying silent about things that matter." The young couple returned too, and they joined a local racial justice organization and were actively working to address bias in their own professional spaces. They thanked David for the wake-up call that had pushed them from performative allyship to actual action. Thanks for watching Axiom USA, where we tell the stories that matter. The stories that challenge injustice and celebrate those who stand up against it, like, share, and subscribe because every view helps us reach someone who needs to hear that change is possible, that standing up makes a difference, and that your voice matters in the fight for justice. What happened at that cafe wasn't just about one CEO firing one discriminatory manager. It was about what happens when people in power use that power to enforce accountability rather than protect the status quo. When they refuse to let discrimination hide behind professional language and corporate policies. When they recognize that real change requires more than diversity statements and sensitivity training. It requires a fundamental commitment to treating every human being with dignity regardless of how they look, what they wear, or what assumptions we make about their worth. David could have quietly fired Susan and moved on, could have handled it internally without the public exposure, could have protected his brand reputation by minimizing the incident. But instead, he chose transparency, chose to acknowledge systemic failures, chose to use his platform to spark a broader conversation about discrimination in service industries and the assumptions we make about people based on their appearance. The lesson here isn't just that discrimination is wrong. We all know that intellectually. The lesson is that confronting discrimination requires action, requires speaking up even when it's uncomfortable, requires using whatever power or privilege we have to create change rather than maintain comfort. Because Susan felt empowered to discriminate because she'd done it before without consequences. Because customers who witnessed it stayed silent. Because complaints were logged but not prioritized. Because a culture of complicity allowed her behavior to continue until someone with enough power to stop it experienced it firsthand. Imagine if the elderly regular had complained to corporate months earlier. If the young couple had spoken up in the moment, If Patricia had taken those employee complaints more seriously, imagine how many other people might have been spared that humiliation. That pain, that reminder that no matter how much you achieve, some people will still judge you by the color of your skin and the clothes on your back. But here's the hope in this story. Change happened. Not perfect change, not complete change, but real measurable change because one person refused to accept discrimination, used his power to enforce accountability, and created systems to prevent it from happening again. And that's what we all need to do in our own spheres of influence. Not wait for someone else to fix it, not assume it's not our problem, but recognize that every time we witness injustice and stay silent, we're choosing to be complicit, and every time we speak up, we're choosing to be part of the solution.